Hello, everybody. I'm Phil. I'm an alcoholic. Phil Parker, that is. Um, I was happy to see Don's face, too. I'll fill you in on a little bit more about that trip. I have a thing with flying. I've done it enough to know that I don't care for it. So I had told, I think, Kurt earlier and Don that I don't care to fly out here, but don't worry about it. I've traveled coast to coast with Amtrak, and I can get here just fine. Thank you. Well, Amtrak left Penn Station in New York and got as far as Croton Harmon, which might be 50 miles away, and the train broke down. We hadn't even gotten to Albany, New York. And we had to sit there for 2 hours while they got another engine to come around. Then they had to shift tracks and do all that sort of thing they do. And they finally got it hooked up, and we got to Albany. Well, of course, Albany was a scheduled stop. So we stopped there while they cleaned the train. And then we started out from Albany a little over 2 hours late now. And there were some passenger trains here and there who were ahead of us and a few freights, so we had to sort of creep along behind them. And, sitting there on the train, this guy was going crazy on the PA system. He was telling us more than we wanted to know, And so he said, train number 7 in Chicago, because, I had to change trains in Chicago and come here and arrive in Burlington. So he said, train number 7 will leave as scheduled. So folks who are taking train number 7 will have to make other arrangements. Don't worry about it. Amtrak will take care of you when you get to Chicago. I was taking train number 5, and nothing had been said about 5. So, I talked to higher power, God. I said, it's in your hands. But of course, I would like to control it. And if you please don't let number 5 leave. Well, of course, about an hour later, train number 5 will leave as scheduled, which was 3:05, and we got in Chicago at about 4 o'clock. So the connection was missed. Well, Amtrak was very nice. They put me on a bus, and I got here. That's when Don saw me. I got out at 12:30 last night and got in here at 5:30 this morning, and there was Don and Don, the two Dons, to meet me. So I'm just fine. What an adventure! It was really great. I mean, this bus driver was terrible. He, he was really mean. I said, now I'm pretty sleepy, so be sure and announce Cedar Rapids good and loud, so that I won't sleep past the stop. He said, I'll announce it good and loud. I know my job. So I was quiet for the rest of the trip. And he did let me off at the right place. And I'm so glad to be here. It was an exciting trip. And just to think I was able to do it sober. I didn't have to pick up a drink. There was a lot of booze around the station in Chicago, and I can imagine what I would have done, in another life that I hope is gone one day at a time. I'm Phil. I'm an alcoholic, and I don't know. I'm an alcoholic who, and I've tried to figure this out, I never should have been an alcoholic. I really shouldn't have. But this is an equal opportunity disease, right? It doesn't care where you come from, what color you are, what religion, or anything else. If you got it, you got it. And I think that was the case with me. I think I had it probably from birth, at least the potential to become alcoholic. Of course, we have to pour the booze on that potential in order to blossom out, as I did. But I think the potential was there all the time. I'm from South Carolina originally, not from New York. I came here from New York, but my home is South Carolina. And I grew up in a very religious family. My father was a Baptist minister, and he was from a long line of Baptist preachers of the what we call hard shell Baptist variety. which is another word for fundamentalists. And they were very fundamental in my growing up. No smoking, no drinking, no card playing, no dancing. That's the way I grew up. And absolutely no alcohol anywhere in the house. So that's why I say I have no business being here. Not by logic, but this disease doesn't go by logic. I don't know of anybody in the family who had the problem. They seem to feel that it can be, passed on in the genes. And maybe there's somebody back there on one side or the other that had this disease, but I certainly got it. I grew up in a small town in South Carolina, attending my father's church. I was very religious, as I was brought up to be. We went to church every Sunday, all day Sunday, and a couple of days during the week. I did all the right things. I was a little people pleaser from the very beginning. I sang in the choir. I taught Sunday school. I took old ladies across the street, whether they wanted to go or not. I did all the right things. I was a little zealot. I was a real little sunbeam for Jesus. I'm sure you've heard that song, a sunbeam, I'll be a sunbeam for Jesus. That was me. And absolutely no thoughts of drinking or anything like that. My maternal grandmother lived with us. My grandfather had died, and I vaguely remember him. So I really grew up with her. And she was more of a mother to me than my mother. My mother was there, but she and my father were also in the school business. My father was my school principal for a number of years, and my mother taught school with him, so I went to school under both my parents and to church with them on Sundays. How could I wind up being an alcoholic? My grandmother was there. She was the one that raised me, and she was a beautiful person. She was a big, bosomy woman who really liked to cook. I was her first grandson, born on her birthday. So I could do no wrong. Absolutely not. So I had a I had a very nice growing up. We didn't have much money or anything like that, but everybody was poor. So you didn't know you were poor. And there was a lot of love. My parents were very busy. They were in and out of the house a lot because my father was very serious minister. He did a lot of counseling, and he and my mother were out of the house. There were always people in and out of the house. I grew up around a lot of people. And I have great respect for him. We didn't get along that well because he was a big man with a big voice who had very definite opinions on everything, and he knew where everybody was going, whether you were going up or down. And I was always in midair. my feet were never on the ground, and they used to try to put them there, and I would bob back up in the air. So we didn't understand each other too well. I was a dreamer, a fantasizer, what have you. But it was a good growing up. There was no brutality. There was no violence. There was no drinking or anything like that. Bill tells us in chapter 5 that we were first spiritually sick. And I remember reading that for quite a while in AA and not really understanding what he meant when he said we were first spiritually sick. Because, of course, when you first come in, or at least when I first came in, I was told that, the clearing up process is that we clear up physically first. Then we begin to sort of get our marbles back. We clear up mentally. And the last step of clearing up is spiritual clarity. But Bill says in chapter 5 that we were first spiritually sick. And that when we clear up spiritually, then we clear up physically and mentally, which is just the opposite from when you first come in. And of course, I understand now that that is what happens after we've been in a while. After we go through the process, the cycle of physical, mental, and spiritual, then it becomes spiritual first, and then we sort of begin to heal mentally and physically. And I can look back now at my alcoholism and see it. I think I was an alcoholic in the making. I was a fantasy person. I never liked reality growing up. I can remember anything but reality. I was a loner. I grew up around people. I grew up in the church. I grew up around crowds of people who came in and out of our house to talk with my parents, but I learned very early how to isolate in the crowd. And that was one of my problems when I came into AA, because I could sit in an AA meeting and listen very attentively and not hear a thing that was being said. My mind would be absolutely somewhere else. Also, I was a liar, and I was a liar, I feel, in the deepest sense of the word. I told you nothing. I wouldn't tell you that wall was green. I was too good of a Baptist to do that. I wouldn't tell an outright lie. But I learned very early to tell you nothing, to let you tell me first. And then I would tell you what I wanted you to hear. And that was manipulation before I knew the meaning of the word. So somehow these qualities were there with me before I ever poured a drink on top of them so that they could blossom out into full alcoholism. I started drinking rather late from some stories I've heard. I was in my 20s. I had gone through school with my parents. I had been sent away to a boarding school, and it's very good to be here in Iowa for this reason. The boarding school that I was sent away to was a mission school, a Methodist mission school, where they were very strict. And you know they had to be strict for my father, a dyed-in-the-wool Baptist, to send me to a Methodist school. But this school had a reputation of really being tough and really being strict. And the school was run by a woman from Iowa. This was years ago. She was from Iowa. Her name was Lula Bryan. So if anybody here knows about Lula Bryan, speak to me at the end of the meeting. She was a tough one. She was principal. But it's amazing that I would get to Iowa. So, Miss Bryan, this is for you, because you really tried. You just didn't know I was an alcoholic. But I went through high school and through college, to Good Baptist College, of course, and finally went off to graduate school. And going off to graduate school was the first time I had been away from home. I was every bit of almost 2,000 miles away from home for the first time. And I remember that first year I worked very hard because my father had told me time is money. He was very strict, had a very strict work ethic, you know. We didn't get allowances, anything like that. You had to work and make your own money, that kind of thing. That's the sort of person he was. And I worked very hard, and it was easy for me to do well because I was an isolator. I was a loner. I could go to the library in the morning, take a sandwich with me, eat my sandwich at noon, and stay there until they closed out at night. That was no problem with me. That was how much into my head I was, so I did very well. The second year, I began to sort of look around, and these people appeared from nowhere. They said, you know, you're antisocial. You should really get out some. It's not good. It's not healthy. We're going to take you out. So I didn't resist too much, and they took me to my first bar. There are no public bars in South Carolina. At least there weren't in those days. I guess there still aren't. It was illegal. You can have private clubs and things like that, but no open bars like we have in New York. So I had never been to a bar before. I had never seen people sit around and drink like that. And I remember that first night as if it were yesterday. They took me in this place. I remember the cigarette smoke. I started smoking that night. I remember the dim lights, the hushed voices of the people. It was a very dignified, sophisticated bar, not the kind I would later wind up in. I remember the tinkle of ice in the glasses and how sophisticated this was. And I remember my first drink. I remember I was shocked that I didn't drop dead all at once because I took it. And then I remember how it made me feel, how it went down to my toes and my fingertips and to the top of my head. And all of a sudden, I wasn't isolated anymore. All of a sudden, I wasn't a loner anymore. All of a sudden, I felt a part of. I felt that I belonged. I had never felt that I belonged in this universe. I had never felt that there was anywhere for me. And all of a sudden, sitting at this table with this drink, I felt that I had friends that I had known for life. I felt that I was clever. I felt that I was extremely good looking, talented, with a great future. The world just opened up for me. And I could end my story right there because that's what booze did for me, and I drank. I drank and drank and drank. What happened, to skip over a lot, was that I was an alcoholic. I didn't know I was an alcoholic, and the progression of the disease caught up with me. I drank. I loved bars. I started out as a bar drinker. And in those days, you did drinking with flash. The women wore cocktail dresses. Can you believe that? There were glasses, special glasses that you drank out of, and things like that. And on the weekend was a very sophisticated thing to do. But of course, I became the kind of drunk who would eventually go to the bar, and I'd order the drinks, and I'd sit and look at my reflection in the mirror. I used to love to do that. And go into fantasy land, and I would just go into another world, and then they'd be picking me up off the floor or throwing me out of the bar. Those were the first symptoms. I definitely had personality changes when I drank. I could drink a lot in the beginning without getting drunk, and it never dawned on me that this might have been, signs of approaching alcoholism. I got out of school and started teaching, and my teaching career was disastrous. I lost my first job because of being drunk. And this was a job where people liked me, where people didn't want to get rid of me, where they had called me in, but I didn't know I was an alcoholic. I did not know that great, profound thing that we learn in AA, that it's the first drink that gets you drunk. I learned somewhere along the way that I needed to watch my drinking. I had sense enough to know that, but I had no idea that I couldn't pick up the first drink. And I taught in a lot of places. I took a lot of geographics in different colleges because I started teaching on the college level. Later on, the college grapevine, there's a great grapevine in the teaching profession. You can't mess up in one place and they not find out. But people liked me, as they do most of us, and people were always willing to give me another chance. And I'd get all sorts of advice. I'd get things like, Phil, you're a great teacher. You're a wonderful teacher. We love you. We want to keep you here, but you're going to have to do something about your drinking. Now, what I think you should do is just drink brandy. You see, you drink that bourbon, all you South Carolina people do that, and that's no good for you. You drink brandy. Then somebody else will say, well, I drink, but I just drink beer. So why don't you drink beer? And on like that. But none of them understood. It didn't matter what I drank. I would drink it to excess. And I'd wind up getting crazy and getting drunk. And a lot of things began to happen to me. I began to get in trouble with police. I began to get arrested. I began to get very paranoid, very frightened. And I took a lot of geographics teaching. I could always get these jobs. Somehow I'd go to the interviews, and I don't think they believed the things they heard. I'd sit down at the interview, and I'd be shocked myself sometimes when they'd hire me. I said, my God, how did this guy really hire me? But they would, and then they'd find out, sooner or later. I got crazier and crazier, and eventually I was virtually barred from the college scene. I could not get a job. I had tried some high school teaching. My father even tried to help me. He brought me back. You see, I'd have these disastrous falls. I mean, I'd get fired. They would absolutely fire me. It would always be a disastrous thing, because I had gotten to the point that I was a blackout drunk. I would actually black out, and I would not remember things I said and did to people. And I'll give you an example of that. My last teaching job was in Pikeville, Tennessee, on top of a mountain at a reform school. Nobody got fired from that job. It was the state vocational training school run by the state of Tennessee. It's still there. And the gentleman who was superintendent of the school was a wonderful man who liked me very much. His name was Mr. Russell. And Mr. Russell would give me anything I wanted. I taught language arts, and we did plays and what have you. This was a reform school for boys up to the age of 21. If the crime was severe enough and they made 21 there, they would have to be shipped off to Nashville to the pen. But you're talking about some really rough street kids there, ranging from age, say, 12 to 20. And we had two shifts that we worked in. The morning shift people would go to work, and the afternoon people would go to school and so forth. They did a half-day school. They had a coal mine there for the older boys and a 10,000-acre farm for the younger boys. That was a job that nobody lost, as I said. I managed to lose it. What happened was, and I'm told this, I don't remember this at all, but I'm told this by someone who was told it by Mr. Russell's secretary. My drinking had gotten outrageous. And Mr. Russell called me in to talk to me in a fatherly way about the drinking. And I do remember the first little bit of the conversation, because I remember he was very gentle, very solicitous, very, very kind person, which he was. And this was told to me. I don't remember this, but I began screaming at him. And I began calling him names, talked about members of his family that I never met. I told him that I was the only teacher he had. I said, I'm the only person here who does any work. Why are you doing this to me? Why are you bothering me? Everybody here gets drunk. And I'm told that I told him he could have his job. Now, mind you, I have lost job after job after job. At this point, I'm in debt up to my eyeballs. This is a reform school. Where do you go from here? I needed that job. But I told Mr. Russell, what he could do with his job. Then I told him what he could do for me, and I lowered my pants and showed him that part of me that he could do something to. Need I say more? I don't remember this. I don't remember any of this. The next morning when I woke up, you know that feeling? You know you did it. You don't know what. You don't know what, but you know you did it. I brushed my teeth an extra time that morning, took a long shower. I got to school early with my suit and tie on. I was at the blackboard writing, and the principal of the school, not Mr. Russell, but the gentleman who was principal, came by the room, and he called me in the hall. He said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "What do you mean? What am I doing here? I work here." He said, "No, you don't work here. You resigned yesterday and it was accepted." So now you know as much about that as I do, but that shows you what I had come to with blackouts and with my drinking. It was disastrous. It was not long after that that I wound up in a nut house, absolutely crazy. In those days, we didn't the people were beginning to learn about alcoholism, I think, but not much. They put you in the nut house. They put you in the asylum with crazy people. And that's where I wound up. And I'd like to say that for me then, that was the happiest time of my life. I loved it. I knew by then that I could not cope. I could not cope with the outside world. I was locked away. I was secure. I was fed. I did not want to leave. I knew how to ingratiate myself with people, growing up the way I did. And, I was a cut above the other nuts in there because I detoxed. I wasn't organically crazy. I wasn't schizophrenic or anything like that. I was a drunk, drying out. And I dried out in the nut house, and I had pretty good sense after I dried out. And they gave me a little jacket to put on. I remember that. And a little tray of pills. And I was allowed to take pills around to the other patients. And this was just great for me. That was going to be my career for the rest of my life. I mean, I'd stay there forever and hand out the pills, you know, one for you and one for me, one for you and one for me. So I didn't need any booze at that time. They finally put me out, and I had to face reality. They virtually threw me out. I cried when they put me out of there. And and they told me, I'll never forget, that there were two young psychiatrists that liked me very much, and they said, listen, you don't belong here. They said, what happens is, and the drinking did come up, but only as a side issue. A lot of people drink. That's what they said. A lot of people drink. You're going through a phase, and once you go through that phase, you won't need to drink anymore. Well, that was a long phase that I was to go through. They said this, and it's interesting how well-meaning people tell us half-truths. They're not totally false, but they're not the complete truth, because we know the complete truth in here. We know that we're powerless over alcohol, that we can't pick up that first drink. That never came up, and it's not their fault because they didn't know. But they said something like this. They said, your problem is this. You're a very sensitive, intelligent person, and you have been repressed all your life. You grew up black in the South, so you were repressed racially. You grew up in an overly religious home, so you never got a chance to express your own opinions about anything. Religion was shoved down your throat. You never should have taught school because you don't like people, So what you need to do is cut the umbilical cord, get a divorce from your family, go out on your own and think for yourself. And that sounded great to me. We love to blame somebody else anyhow. It wasn't my fault. So I came to New York, and with the luck of the alcoholic, I got good jobs in New York, and I won't go through that. But the same thing happened again. Somewhere along the way, I remember when I went to New York, I had lost the desire to drink. I think the time in the nut house and the pills had taken that away. But I'm an alcoholic, right? And I can't pick up the first drink. And somewhere along the way, I picked up a drink. I don't remember where. It could have been at a party. It could have been anywhere. But I picked it up, and it all started all over again. I began to lose jobs. Now I'm older. Now I'm very depressed. I believed what they told me in the nut house, and it wasn't working. I was even more terrified now. I was more paranoid. I was more depressed and sad. And there was just nothing left to life. So it was about that time that my drinking took to the streets in New York City. I became a wino. I stopped trying anymore to work. I drank on stoops. I drank on park benches. I worked out of day agencies. I washed dishes. I cleaned toilets. I did whatever I could find to do as long as I could make enough money to drink. I went on welfare. I was put off welfare because I mismanaged the money. I was put off for fraud. That was my life. I was homeless. In those days, the word homeless hadn't been coined. We were bums. And I was a bum, and I was in and out of all the major stations in New York City, Grand Central, Penn Station, Port Authority. I circulated those stations. I panhandled for money, and I drank, and I drank, and I drank. I stopped shaving. I stopped bathing. Eventually, I discovered the men's shelter in New York, which at that time was a famous 8 East 3rd Street shelter. They called it the Muni, short for Municipal Lodging House. And I discovered people who drank like me on the Bowery in New York. And I went down to the Bowery, and I went there to die. I went there to drink. And I drank there for a number of years. I became very sick. I got wine sores. I got lice. I got all sorts of other illnesses that people who don't eat properly and who drink a lot of wine get. And that was my situation in the Bowery, and I hope nobody will get offended, but I have to say this for myself because my drinking was not cute. There's nothing about this disease that is, it's a nasty, filthy disease, and I was a shitty, pissy drunk. And I don't want to ever forget that because that's what brought me into this program. I was dying. I had lost a lot of weight. I had wine sores. And a beautiful woman, Helen Ware, was a social worker at that time on the Bowery and a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And she did a very simple thing. She did something that no one had ever done before. She told me her story. And she told me later on, she said, Phil, always tell your story because people will hear your story when they'll hear nothing else. And after all, what else do you have but your story? She said, none of us have anything but our story in Alcoholics Anonymous. And Helen told me her story. Her life was not the same as mine, but identified with her pain, with her suffering, identified with her inability to stop drinking. And she got me to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that was September 16, 1968. And it's been a day at a time in this beautiful program since then. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. It has saved my life. What you see here tonight, what you hear here tonight is a result of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's not a result of me. I could not think when I went to my first meeting. I don't remember my first meeting. The word we use in New York is mochus. I was mochus, which means totally confused. I saw God on the wall and got a resentment and said, okay, I've come full circle. You know, you didn't do anything before, so why are you there now? But a day at a time in AA, I have been able to stay sober and to put this program in my life one day at a time. I have been blessed to work with alcoholics during my sobriety, with alcoholics on Skid Row, on the Bowery, who suffered the same fate that I suffered. And that has been a blessing. That has helped keep me sober a day at a time because I see myself on a daily basis. I make a lot of meetings, and I try to put the steps in my life. This is a beautiful program. I try to do the first 3 steps every morning. I try to remember that I am an alcoholic, that my life is unmanageable, I can't drink. That a power greater than me, God, has restored me to sanity and continues to restore me to sanity on a daily basis. And the beautiful 3rd step of turning my life and will over to the care of God as I understand Him. And that word care I read for years and never saw it. And once it jumped out at me that that is the word for me in that step, the care of God, because I never really felt cared for. All my life, going back to a child, all those days in the church, I would see other people who had it. I knew they had it. I knew they were sincere. I knew they felt that God was close to them. But with all the work I did, with all the teaching Sunday school and singing in the choir, I never felt that I quite made it. I never felt that real closeness with God. I never felt that I was really cared for, that I was protected. And to me, that's what that word care means, that I am protected. That's why I can be fearless going into a 4th step, because if I am protected by God, if I've turned over my life and my will, and my life has 3 parts, past, present, and future. So if I turn my life over to the care of God, I turn over everything that has happened to me, everything I've done in the past, that's been turned over. I turn the present over, whatever is happening today, whatever is going on in my life today, and I turn tomorrow over to the care of God. And to me, that's the gateway step to the other steps, because as we all know, the whole process of turning it over takes the other 9 steps to do. And this has been what the program has done to me. It's given me that spiritual closeness, that spiritual connection, that conscious contact with God, because God was always there. Took me through all the things that I went through, but I didn't have that conscious contact that helps keep me sober a day at a time. I want to close by saying that standing here is such a privilege. It's such a privilege to be alive and to be sober, to be brought back from death. That's how I feel. I spoke at an anniversary not too long ago, and I was saying that, anniversaries in AA, and this reminds me of an anniversary, is sort of like the great holidays, like Christmas, because the gift has been given, the gift of sobriety. Like Passover, because the angel of death has certainly passed us over. There's no doubt about that. Like Easter, because we're all resurrected. We're all resurrected people. I feel that we're all chosen people, blessed people, very blessed. And I've been blessed with the privilege of this program, the privilege of knowing who I am. I've heard people say, I've got to find myself, I know who I am. I'm an alcoholic. That's the bottom line. My name is Phil, and I'm an alcoholic, and I can start off there. I never have to wonder who I am. And there's plenty for me to do as an alcoholic. 12 steps, to do as an alcoholic to keep myself alive. The privilege of not only knowing myself, but of being able to have the company, the support, the love of a room full of people like you. Because we do love each other. There's a lot of love in AA rooms. And by AA love, I mean this. If I said tonight that I wanted to go out and pick up a drink, I'm sure that there would be people who would gather around me from this room, people who never met me before, who would help keep me sober tonight. And that's AA love. So it's a privilege to be an alcoholic. I'm a very privileged alcoholic, a very grateful alcoholic, a very blessed alcoholic. And thank you for being a part of that blessing.